The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, carrying the sharp scent of pine and impending rain. High on a sheer cliff face in Colorado's San Juan National Forest, an eagle's eyrie clung precariously to the rock, a massive tangle of branches, twigs, and feathers woven over years of patient labor. This was home to a pair of bald eagles, majestic symbols of the wild American West, their white heads gleaming against the darkening sky. The male, with his piercing yellow beak and broad 7-foot wingspan, had claimed this spot decades ago, returning each spring to the same rugged outcrop overlooking the Animas River valley below. Inside the nest, 2 eaglets huddled close, their fluffy gray down-matted from the morning's drizzle. The older one, a female they would later name Sierra by the wildlife biologists who monitored the area, was bolder, her dark eyes scanning the horizon with an instinctual vigilance. She was nearly 6 weeks old, her wings already showing the first hints of feathers that would one day carry her soaring. Beside her, the smaller chick, a male dubbed Rio, chirped softly, his body trembling as thunder rumbled in the distance. Their mother, Ilara, perched on the nest's edge, her talons gripping the weathered wood as she scanned for threats. She had spent the day hunting, bringing back a fresh trout from the river, but now the sky was turning against them. The storm had been building all afternoon, a classic summer squall rolling in from the west, fueled by the heat rising off the desert valleys. Dark clouds swallowed the sun, casting long shadows over the forest floor where hikers on the Colorado Trail paused to zip up their rain jackets. In the nearby town of Durango, locals like Park Ranger Maria Gonzalez glanced at the weather app on her phone, muttering about the unpredictability of mountain storms. "Another one of those afternoon blowers," she said to her colleague at the visitor center, where maps of eagle-watching spots lined the walls. These birds were celebrities here, drawing birders from across the states, but no one could predict when nature would turn fierce. As the first fat raindrops splattered against the cliff, Ilara spread her wings, calling out a sharp, keening cry to her mate, who circled overhead. The wind whipped harder, gusts up to 50 miles an hour tearing at the nest's edges. Twigs snapped and scattered into the void, plummeting hundreds of feet to the rocky talus slope below. Sierra instinctively flattened herself, her tiny claws digging in, while Rio, weaker and less coordinated, shifted uneasily. A particularly vicious gust slammed into the eyrie, shaking it like a boat in rough seas. Ilara tried to shield them, her body a feathered barrier, but the force was relentless. Then, in a heartbreaking instant, it happened. Rio, caught off guard by a sudden lurch, tumbled over the nest's rim. His shrill screech echoed off the rocks as he fell, wings flapping uselessly against the torrent. He plummeted 30 feet before a narrow ledge snagged his body, leaving him sprawled in a dazed heap, rain soaking his down. Above, Sierra peered over the edge, her calls turning frantic, a mix of alarm and confusion. Ilara dove toward the fallen chick, but the wind buffeted her back, forcing her to veer away. She landed briefly on a nearby outcrop, her head cocked, assessing the danger. The father eagle swooped in, his powerful form cutting through the sheets of rain, but even he hesitated, the storm's fury making rescue impossible. Down on the ledge, Rio struggled, his breaths coming in weak gasps. The rock was slick, eroded by years of weather, and the drop from there was sheer, another 200 feet to the river's edge. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled, exhaustion and fear pinning him in place. The storm intensified, lightning cracking like gunfire across the valley, illuminating the scene in stark flashes. Thunder boomed, vibrating through the stone, and hail began to pelt the mountainside, each icy pellet a potential bruise on the fragile eaglet. Before the story goes deeper, make sure to subscribe for more narratives like this. Miles away, in the bustling ranger station, Maria's radio crackled to life. A volunteer spotter from the local Audubon Society, an avid birder named Tom Riley, had been monitoring the nest via a trail cam when the fall occurred. "Ranger Gonzalez, it's Tom from Eagle's Watch. One of the chicks just went over. Nest cam caught it. Storm's bad up there. I can barely see from my viewpoint." Maria's heart sank. She knew this pair well. They'd raised successful broods before, but nature didn't play favorites. Grabbing her keys, she radioed for backup. Dispatch, this is Gonzalez. Possible eagle rescue on Cliffside Trail. Sending coordinates. We need the climbing team and a vet on standby. As the rain turned the dirt roads to mud, Maria sped toward the trailhead in her Forest Service truck, the wipers slapping rhythmically. She was a third-generation Coloradan, raised on stories of the wild from her grandfather, a miner who'd worked these mountains. Rescuing wildlife wasn't just a job, it was a calling, especially for icons like the bald eagle, rebounding from near extinction thanks to conservation efforts. But storms like this complicated everything. Slippery trails, low visibility, and the risk of endangering humans too. She thought of Rio, alone and exposed, and hoped Sierra's cries from above would keep the parents nearby, warding off predators like ravens or coyotes that might scent vulnerability. By the time Maria reached the base of the cliff, the storm was at its peak. She parked and shouldered her pack, filled with ropes, gloves, and a portable carrier. Tom met her there, his binoculars dangling from his neck, face etched with worry. He's on that mid-level ledge, Tom said, pointing upward through the downpour. Sierra's still in the nest, calling like crazy. The parents are circling, but they won't go near him in this wind. Maria nodded, pulling on her helmet. The climb would be grueling, a mix of fixed ropes and free solo sections, but she'd trained for it. As she started up the wet rock face, hand over hand, the wind tugged at her like an adversary, and Rio's faint cheeps spurred her on. Higher up, the world narrowed to the rhythm of her breaths and the sting of rain on her skin. Sierra's silhouette appeared against the gray sky, her form a guardian at the nest's edge, unwilling to leave her post even as worry consumed her. The sibling bond, forged in the cramped eyrie, held her there, a tiny sentinel against the chaos. Maria paused on a small outcrop, catching sight of the fallen chick for the first time. He was huddled, eyes half closed, but alive. Just a little further, she told herself, the storm's roar drowning out all else. The rescue was just beginning, and the mountain wasn't done testing them yet. Maria's boots scraped against the slick granite, each step a calculated risk as she ascended the cliff face. The rain had eased to a persistent drizzle, but the wind still gusted unpredictably, whipping her ponytail across her face and blurring her vision with water droplets. Her fingers, numb from the cold, gripped the fixed rope anchored to bolts driven into the rock years ago by the climbing team. Below, the Anima's river churned like molten silver, its roar a distant hum beneath the cliff's echo chamber. She could feel the weight of the mountain pressing down, a reminder that out here in the San Juans, nature didn't yield easily to human intervention. Halfway up, Maria paused on a narrow shelf, her chest heaving as she assessed the remaining climb. The ledge where Rio lay was just visible now, a jagged protrusion about 15 feet wide, overgrown with tufts of alpine grass and lichens that glowed faintly in the post-storm light. The eaglet's faint cries cut through the air, weak but insistent, like a Morse code of desperation. Sierra's responses echoed from above, sharper and more urgent, a dialogue only the wild understood. Maria wiped her brow with the back of her glove, tasting salt and grit. She'd seen plenty of wildlife in distress during her 10 years with the Forest Service, bears caught in fences, deer with broken legs, but an eaglet in freefall hit different. These birds were survivors, symbols of resilience after the pesticide bans and habitat protections had pulled them back from the brink. Failing Rio wasn't an option. "Tom, you copy?" She radioed down, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. Static crackled before his reply came through. "Yeah, Maria. You're looking good from here. Chick's still moving, flapping a bit. Parents are perched on that pine across the way, watching like hawks." "Fitting, huh?" She allowed a small chuckle, the sound swallowed by the wind. Tom was a fixture in Durango's birding community, a retired teacher who'd traded lesson plans for trail cams and spotting scopes. His passion had led to the nest's monitoring program, funded by grants from the National Eagle Center in Minnesota. "Keep an eye on them. If the adults dive, let me know. Last thing we need is a mid-rescue aerial assault." "Roger that. Climbing team's en route with the basket. ETA 20 minutes if the road holds." Maria unclipped her carabiner and moved laterally, traversing a diagonal crack that required her full body weight against the rock. Her muscles burned, a familiar ache from weekend climbs at the Animas River walls, where she'd hone her skills with friends over craft beers at steamworks afterward. But this wasn't recreation. One slip, and she'd join the talus debris below. As she neared the ledge, Rio came into clearer view. The eaglet was smaller than she'd imagined, no bigger than a football, his gray down plastered to his body like wet feathers on a drowned kitten. One wing was awkwardly folded beneath him, possibly sprained from the impact, and his beak parted in shallow pants. He didn't flee as she approached, too exhausted or trusting in his vulnerability. "Easy there, little guy," Maria murmured, more to herself than the bird. She eased onto the ledge, distributing her weight carefully to avoid startling him. The rock was colder than ice, seeping through her pants, and the drop-off yawned just beyond, a vertigo-inducing void. Crouching low, she extended a gloved hand, speaking in the soft, reassuring tone she used with spooked hikers. "You're okay. We're gonna get you back up top." From the nest above, Sierra's head appeared, her dark eyes locking onto the intruder. A low, warning screech pierced the air. Not aggressive, but territorial, the siblings' instinct to protect what remained of their family. Maria froze, respecting the boundary. She'd read the reports from the biologists. Eaglets formed tight bonds early, sharing food and warmth, and separation could trigger stress responses that mimicked human grief. Sierra wouldn't abandon her post, even if it meant standing vigil alone. Pulling a lightweight towel from her pack, Maria inched closer to Rio. He flinched at first, his tiny talons scrabbling against the stone, but then subsided, perhaps sensing no immediate threat. Gently, she draped the towel over him, bundling his form to stabilize the wing and ward off the chill. His body was warmer than expected, a fragile furnace against the elements, and his heart raced like a trapped hummingbird under her palm. "Gotcha," she whispered, lifting him with practiced care. He weighed next to nothing, a puff of feathers and bones, but his trust, or resignation, tugged at her. In that moment, she thought of her own kids back in Durango, asleep under quilts while she braved the night. Parenting in the wild was no less fierce. Securing Rio in the portable carrier strapped to her chest, Maria radioed down. "Chick secured. Minor injuries visible, but he's alert. Heading back to the fixed lines." The relief in Tom's voice was palpable. "Atta girl. Team's almost at the base. Vet from the rehab center's with them. Dr. Ellis, the one who handled that owl last summer." As Maria began her descent, the carrier pressed against her, Rio's subtle movements a reminder of the stakes. The wind had died to a whisper, and the clouds parted just enough for a sliver of sunset to gild the peaks, turning the wet rocks to gold. But peace was fleeting. A shadow passed overhead. The father eagle, his massive form gliding silently, yellow eyes fixed on the bundle at her chest. He didn't attack, but his presence was a warning, a paternal claim that transcended the storm. At the base, the climbing team waited, their truck's lights cutting through the twilight. Dr. Ellis, a wiry woman in her 50s with a ponytail streaked gray, rushed forward as Maria handed over the carrier. "How's he doing?" Ellis asked, peering inside with a penlight. Shocked, but breathing steady. "Fell about 30 feet, landed on that ledge like it was meant to be." Maria peeled off her wet jacket, shivering in the cooling air. The team gathered around, faces lit by headlamps, a mix of rangers and volunteers who dropped everything for this call. In small towns like Durango, community wove tight. Word of an eagle rescue would spread by morning, filling the coffee shops with tales. Ellis nodded, her expression professional yet kind. "We'll hydrate him, check for fractures. If the wing's okay, he might fledge with his sister come fall." She glanced up at the cliff, where Sierra's silhouette still watched. "That one's a fighter, guarding the nest like a pro." Maria followed her gaze, a swell of emotion rising. The storm had passed, leaving the forest dripping and alive. But the real test lay ahead, reintegrating Rio without disrupting the family dynamic. As the team loaded up, heading to the wildlife rehab facility on the outskirts of town, she lingered a moment, breathing in the pine-scented air. The mountain had given a little today, but it always demanded more. Sierra's distant call carried on the breeze, a lonely sentinel's song, urging them onward into the uncertain night. The drive to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center wound through the darkening foothills, the truck's headlights carving tunnels through the mist that clung to the ponderosas like a shroud. Maria rode shotgun, her damp clothes chafing against the seat, while Dr. Ellis cradled the carrier on her lap in the back. Rio's breaths came in soft, irregular puffs, audible over the hum of the engine. The facility sat on the edge of Durango, a low-slung building tucked behind a chain-link fence, its sign weathered by years of snow and sun. Southern Ute Wildlife Rescue. Funded partly by tribal grants and donations from eagle enthusiasts, it was a haven for the injured and orphaned, from black bears to songbirds. Ellis unlocked the side door, flipping on the fluorescent lights that buzzed to life in the exam room. The space smelled of antiseptic and hay, shelves lined with incubators, X-ray machines, and jars of supplements. She set the carrier on the stainless steel table and eased Rio out, his body limp but responsive as she placed him under a warming lamp. "First things first," she said, her voice calm and methodical, the kind honed from decades in veterinary school and field work. Maria leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching as Ellis gently extended the eaglet's wing. No obvious breaks, but bruising bloomed purple along the feathers, and the joint swelled like a ripe plum. "He's a tough one," Ellis murmured, probing with gloved fingers. Rio blinked, his black eyes hazy, but he didn't cry out. Eaglets were wired for silence in distress, an evolutionary trick to avoid drawing predators. A quick hydration syringe followed, electrolyte solution dribbled into his beak, and soon color returned to his downy skin. Maria's phone buzzed, a text from Tom. Nest cam shows Sierra pacing, parents back on perch, all quiet up top. Relief washed over her, but it was tempered. Releasing Rio too soon risked rejection, and the sibling dynamic was delicate. Sierra might see him as a rival now, her instincts sharpened by survival. Back at the cliff the next morning, the sun broke through a crystalline sky, painting the San Juans in sharp relief. Tom Riley arrived at the trailhead before dawn, thermos of black coffee in hand, his spotting scope slung over his shoulder. He'd barely slept, replaying the storm footage on his laptop until the wee hours. The Eagle Cam, a solar-powered setup hidden in the rocks, streamed live to the Audubon app, where viewers from as far as New York had tuned in, hearts pounding at the drama. "Morning, Tom," called out Jake Harlan, a young climber from the Forest Service team, as he unloaded gear from his Jeep. Jake was in his mid-20s, fresh from college in Boulder, with a tattoo of a golden eagle curling around his forearm, a nod to his Navajo heritage blended with Colorado roots. "Mornin'. Sierra's been vocal all night, short bursts like she's checking in." Tom adjusted his scope, the lens sweeping the area. There she was, the lone eaglet, her form more defined in daylight, wings half spread as if testing the air. The nest looked ragged, edges frayed from the gale, but it held. The mother, Alara, preened nearby, her beak methodical, while the father scanned the valley for threats. No sign of intrusion yet, but coyotes prowled the base at night, their yips echoing faintly on the recordings. Up at the rehab center, Maria arrived with breakfast burritos from Billy Goat's Saloon, green chile pork, a Durango staple that warmed the soul after a chill night. Ellis was already at work, consulting with a technician over Rio's chart. "Vital stable," she reported, sipping her own coffee. "We'll keep him 24 hours for observation, anti-inflammatories for the wing, and soft food, finely chopped mouse to mimic what Mom would regurgitate." Maria nodded, peering into the recovery pen, a spacious enclosure with perches and a shallow pool. Rio perched awkwardly on a branch, head cocked, watching them with wary intelligence. Eaglets learned fast. By 6 weeks they recognized patterns, and this human intrusion was etching itself into his young mind. The day unfolded in a rhythm of checks and waits. In town, word spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community. At the Durango Herald office, reporter Lena Vasquez fired off a quick post on the local Facebook group. Eagle chick rescued from stormfall. Updates coming. Comments flooded in. Birders sharing photos from past sightings. Locals offering donations for the rehab fund. Maria fielded calls from the regional wildlife office in Grand Junction, assuring them the protocol was sound. No relocation unless absolutely necessary. Bald eagles were territorial. Moving the family could doom the nest. By afternoon, the team reconvened at the cliff. Jake led the ascent this time, his youthful energy a contrast to Maria's steady pace. They carried a specialized release basket. Lightweight and camouflaged, designed for minimal disturbance. Tom monitored from below, radio in hand. Parents are agitated, fathers doing low passes. Up top, Sierra's presence dominated the airy. She stood taller now, her down fluffing in the breeze, a miniature guardian with her sibling's absence sharpening her resolve. As Jake crested the rim, she backed away slightly, wings flared, issuing a series of sharp peeps that carried down the rock face. "Easy, girl," Jake whispered, securing the rope before easing the basket into view. He didn't approach the nest directly. Instead, he placed it on a neutral outcrop, just below the airy, where the parents could scent their chick without feeling cornered. Rio, bundled inside, stirred at the motion, his beak parting in a tentative call. The response was immediate. Ilara's head snapped toward the sound, her body tensing. She glided down, landing with graceful precision a few feet from the basket, yellow eyes assessing. The father followed, perching on a higher crag, his massive silhouette a sentinel's shadow. Maria watched from a lower vantage, heart in her throat. This was the gamble. Reintroduction in the wild meant trusting nature's course. If the parents accepted Rio, he'd reintegrate. If not, he'd face rehab isolation, imprinting on humans that could bar him from wild release. Minutes stretched like hours. Ilara approached, her beak nudging the basket's lid, which Jake had left ajar. A soft cluck escaped her, the eagle equivalent of a mother's coo. Rio responded, scrambling out with wobbly legs, his injured wing dragging slightly. He cheeped louder, and Ilara lowered her head, regurgitating a small fish onto the rock. An offering, a bond reaffirmed. Sierra's cry rang out from above, curious now rather than alarmed. She peered down, her body language shifting from defense to intrigue. The siblings' reunion unfolded in slow motion. Rio hopped toward the nest's edge, guided by instinct, while Ilara herded him gently with her wing. The father circled once, a protective loop, before settling back. Jake descended with a grin splitting his face. It worked. They're together. Down below, Tom whooped, pumping his fist. But Maria's relief was cautious. The storm's toll lingered. Rio's wing needed time, and Sierra's vigilance hinted at the emotional scars of separation. As the sun dipped toward the La Plata Mountains, casting long shadows over the valley, the family regrouped. The airy, battered but unbroken, stood as a testament to resilience, the wild heart of Colorado beating on, one fragile life at a time. Yet whispers of new threats loomed. A logging proposal nearby that could encroach on the habitat, testing the eagle's future as much as the storm had their present. The rescue was a victory, but the story of survival was far from over. The days following Rio's reintroduction blurred into a tense vigil, the eagle family under constant watch from the trail cams and spotters' scopes. In the rehab center's quiet office, Dr. Ellis pored over data logs, her coffee growing cold as she cross-referenced Rio's vitals against fledging benchmarks from past broods. The eaglet had taken to the nest with surprising ease, his initial wobbles giving way to tentative hops under Ilara's watchful eye. Sierra, ever the sentinel, had adjusted too, her initial standoffishness melting into shared meals where she'd nudge portions toward her brother, a gesture that spoke of forgiveness in the wild's unforgiving lexicon. But Ellis knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Stress from the fall could manifest in subtle ways. Delayed growth, weakened immunity, and the parents' acceptance was a fragile thread. Maria Gonzalez drove the winding roads between the cliff and town more than usual that week, her truck's radio tuned to KDNK for updates on weather and local news. Durango buzzed with the rescue story. The Herald ran a front-page piece with Jake's photo, capturing the moment Rio tumbled back into the airy, and social media lit up with shares from Eagle fans across the Southwest. "Our little miracle bird," one commenter wrote, attaching a drawing of a bandaged eaglet. Maria appreciated the support. It funneled donations to the rehab fund, but it also brought pressure. The Forest Service fielded inquiries from national outlets, and whispers of the nearby logging proposal gained traction, turning a feel-good tale into a cautionary one. At the visitor center, Maria met with Tom Riley over lukewarm vending machine sodas, maps spread across the counter like battle plans. The proposal came from a timber company out of Denver, eyeing a swath of old-growth ponderosas just 2 miles east of the cliff. Sustainable harvest, the execs called it in their glossy brochures, promising jobs for laid-off mill workers in Bayfield. But Tom, with his decades of birding data, saw red flags. Those trees buffer the wind, lose them, and storms like the one that hit Rio become routine. Plus, the noise from chainsaws, it'll spook the parents right out of fledging season. Maria traced the boundary lines with her finger, the ink blurring slightly from humidity. She'd grown up hearing her father's tales of clear cuts scarring the San Juans in the 80s, before environmental regs tightened. Now, with climate shifts making wildfires fiercer, every acre mattered. Their conversation was interrupted by Jake Harlan bursting through the door, his climbing harness still clipped to his belt from a morning patrol. "Got footage. Rio's trying to flap." First real wing stretch since the fall. He pulled up the live stream on his tablet, the grainy image showing the eaglet on the nest's rim, his injured wing quivering as he balanced against a breeze. Sierra preened nearby, her own wings more assured, already spanning half her mother's. The siblings' dynamic had deepened in Rio's absence. Sierra's guardianship hadn't faded but evolved. Her peeps now a mix of encouragement and play. Ilara hovered close, her beak dripping with regurgitated salmon from a morning hunt along the Animas, ensuring both chicks got their fill. Maria's chest tightened with a mix of pride and worry. He's got spirit, but if that logging kicks off before they fledge... She trailed off, the unspoken risk hanging heavy. Bald eagles needed quiet skies and stable thermals. Disruption could mean the fledglings starving or wandering into traffic on Highway 550. Tom nodded, his face creased like old leather. "We rally the community. Petition the Forest Service, get the Audubon on board. I've got contacts at the EPA in Denver." As evening fell, Maria hiked the cliffside trail alone. The path familiar under her boots. Switchbacks etched by thousands of footsteps from tourists in Patagonia vests and locals in Carhartt. The air carried the earthy tang of damp soil and wildflowers, columbines nodding in the fading light. At the overlook, she glassed the area with binoculars, the family silhouetted against the lavender dusk. Rio perched higher now, his form less hunched, while Sierra tested a short glide to a nearby branch, her landing clumsy but triumphant. The parents roosted close, Ilara's head tucked under her wing, the father alert on a pine snag. No overt signs of distress, but Maria imagined the subtle tensions. Rio's slower recovery making him reliant. Sierra's boldness pushing boundaries, the storm's shadow lingering in their collective memory. Back in town, the community meeting packed the Strater Hotel's ballroom, chandeliers casting a warm glow over folding chairs crammed with residents. Lena Vasquez from the Herald moderated, her notebook at the ready as speakers took the mic. First up was a timber rep in a pressed shirt, touting economic boosts, 50 jobs, road improvements. "We're good stewards," he insisted, flashing slides of replanted saplings. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Maria sat in the back row, flanked by Tom and Jake, her ranger badge glinting under the lights. Then Tom stood, his voice steady as he projected Nest Cam clips on the screen. The storm's fury, Rio's fall, the rescue's grit. This isn't just about trees. It's about what lives in them. These eagles have nested here since before Durango was a dot on the map. Logging now risks everything we've fought to protect. Applause erupted, mixed with heckles from a few loggers in the corner. Jake followed, sharing his Navajo grandfather's stories of balanced land use, weaving indigenous wisdom with science. "The mountain gives. We can't just take." Maria spoke last, her words measured but fierce. I held that chick in my arms, felt his heart racing like it was my own. We've pulled eagles back from the edge once. Don't make us do it again. The room thrummed with energy, petitions circulating faster than free Anheuser-Busch samples at the fair. By night's end, over 200 signatures, emails drafted to senators in Washington. It wasn't a win yet, but momentum built, a human echo of the eagle's resilience. The next dawn, Maria returned to the cliff with the team, a routine check turning poignant. Rio's wings showed progress, less drag, more lift in his flaps, and Sierra's flights grew bolder, skimming the thermals like previews of freedom. But as they packed up, a distant chainsaw whine echoed from the east, a test cut from the timber crew scouting the site. Alara's head jerked toward the sound, her body tensing, while the eaglets huddled closer. The intrusion pierced the peace, a harbinger of conflicts to come. Maria lingered, the saw's growl fading into the wind, her resolve hardening. The family was mending, but the mountain's trials were layering anew, testing not just feathers and bones, but the will of those who guarded them. The chainsaw's whine lingered in Maria's ears long after she descended the trail, a mechanical scar on the morning's serenity. She gripped the steering wheel tighter as she drove back to Durango, the San Juan byways twisting like veins through the forested hills. The air inside the truck carried the faint, acrid tang of exhaust mixed with the wild's residue, pine sap and damp earth clinging to her boots. Rio and Sierra's progress was a bright spot, but that distant buzz was a reality check, pulling the rescue's triumph into the harsh light of human encroachment. By the time she pulled into the ranger station lot, her mind was already mapping next steps. More meetings, more data, more fights to keep the Eagles' world intact. Inside the station, the bullpen hummed with the low chatter of colleagues nursing thermoses of coffee from the Anima's City Cafe. Strong, black, and bitter, the way locals liked it after a restless night. Tom Riley was there, hunched over his laptop at a scarred wooden desk, the screen glowing with spreadsheets of nesting stats and habitat maps. "Morning, Maria," he said without looking up, his voice gravelly from years of calling out bird sightings. "Saw your truck. That noise from the east?" "Yeah, scout cut probably. They're testing the ground." She dropped her pack by the door, the thud echoing her frustration. Jake Harlan wandered in from the garage, wiping grease from his hands on a rag, his tattoo peeking from under rolled sleeves. He'd been tinkering with the trail cams, upgrading batteries for longer range feeds. "Heard it too. Felt like a gut punch up on the ridge. The parents scattered for a bit. Ilara did a wide circle, like she was scouting escape routes." Maria poured herself a mug, the steam rising in lazy curls. The station's walls were plastered with posters. "Leave no trace ethics," Eagle recovery timelines from the 70s DDT era, and faded photos of past rescues. She thought of her grandfather again, how he'd point out the scars on the hills from old mining ops, teaching her that land healed slow but remembered everything. "We can't let it escalate. That petition's got legs, but we need hard numbers. Tom's got the bird data. Jake, can you pull thermal scans from the cams? Show how the buffer zone affects thermals?" Jake nodded, grabbing a donut from the communal box, glazed, dusted with sugar that stuck to his fingers. "On it. I've been cross-referencing with wind patterns from Noe. Lose those trees and updrafts shift. Could make fledging a nightmare for the kids." He meant Rio and Sierra, the nicknames slipping in like family shorthand. In Durango's outdoor crowd, wildlife blurred into kin. You'd hear folks at the farmers' market swapping stories about their bear or that owl like neighborhood gossip. The morning stretched into strategy sessions, phones ringing with tips from locals, a retired logger offering insider intel on the company's timeline, a teacher from Miller Middle School wanting to bring kids for an Eagle education hike. Maria fielded a call from Dr. Ellis at the rehab center, her voice crisp over the line. "Rio's looking solid, wings flexing without hitch. He'll be air-ready in weeks if no setbacks. But keep the stress low. That logging noise could trigger cortisol spikes." Maria jotted notes, the pen scratching paper like talons on rock. "Copy. We're pushing back. Any advice for monitoring from afar?" Trail cams with audio, if you can swing it. Eaglets vocalize stress differently. Higher pitch, more erratic. Ellis paused, the sound of feathers rustling in the background. Sierra's still the anchor. Saw the feed. She's bossing him around already, sharing the best perch spots. Hanging up, Maria felt a pang, pride laced with the weight of what hung in the balance. By noon, they hit the road again, convoy style, Maria's truck leading Tom's Subaru, Jake trailing in the service van loaded with gear. The drive to the logging site's edge took them past meadows dotted with grazing elk, their antlers like crowns against the bluebird sky. But as they crested a rise, the scene shifted. Yellow machinery hulked in a cleared staging area, felled trunks stacked like matchsticks, the ground churned to mud. A chain-link fence ringed the perimeter, no trespassing signs flapping in the breeze. The air reeked of diesel and fresh sawdust, a stark contrast to the forest's clean bite. They parked discreetly on a pull-out, scopes and cameras at the ready. From their vantage, the operation looked small-scale for now. Just a dozer idling and a handful of workers in hard hats, consulting blueprints under a pop-up tent. But the proximity chilled Maria. This was no distant threat. 2 miles, Tom muttered, zooming his lens. Close enough to echo up the cliff during peak hours. A worker fired up another saw, the rev slicing through the quiet. And in Maria's mind's eye, she saw Ilara's feathers ruffle, the eaglets huddling. Jake set up a discreet audio recorder, capturing the ambient roar. This'll pair with the eagle calls, show the overlap. As they worked, a truck rumbled up the access road, kicking gravel. Out stepped the timber rep from the meeting. A burly guy named Harlan, no relation to Jake, with a clipboard and a skeptical squint. Forest Service? We're permitted. What's the beef? Maria stepped forward, badge visible, her tone even but firm. Just documenting, Mr. Harlan. That site's buffered to the Eagle Eyrie, federal protections under the Endangered Species Act, even if they're not listed anymore. Any impact assessment filed. He shifted, boots scuffing dirt. It's in process. Jobs, Ranger. Folks need work post-wildfire layoffs. Jake bristled beside her, but she held up a hand. We get that, but so do the birds. One storm nearly took a chick. Noise like this could scatter the family before they fledge. Harlan eyed them, then shrugged. Talk to the bosses in Denver. We're just the boots on the ground. He climbed back in, engine growling to life, leaving a dust cloud that settled like defeat. Back at the overlook later that afternoon, the team glassed the Eyrie. The sun slanted golden through the pines, warming the rocks where wild turkeys scratched for seeds below. Rio was more active, his flaps gaining rhythm, though Sierra still dominated the space, her wingspan casting brief shadows over him. A low call from Ilara signaled a food drop, a rabbit scrap torn from a morning kill, and the siblings tore in, beaks flashing in a frenzy of survival. But as another faint chainsaw whine drifted on the wind, Ilara paused mid-tier, head swiveling east. The father launched from his perch, a dark arrow vanishing into the clouds, his absence a silent protest. Maria lowered her binoculars, throat tight. They're feeling it. Tom packed his scope, face grim. Petition hits the regional office tomorrow. We've got allies. Sierra Club, local tribes, but it's a race. Jake nodded, slinging his pack. Rio's almost there, if we can hold the line till fledging. The drive home wove through lengthening shadows, the radio crackling with a forecast of clear skies, small mercies in a mounting storm of another kind. At her kitchen table that night, Maria spread maps under the glow of a salt lamp, her kids' drawings taped nearby. Stick-figure eagles soaring over crayon mountains. The rescue had started with one fallen chick, but now it branched into a broader fight, for habitat, for legacy, for the wild pulse that defined these mountains. Sierra's guardianship from the nest mirrored her own vigilance, a shared thread of protection against forces that chipped away at the edges. Sleep came fitful, dreams laced with wings and whirring blades, the eaglet's future hanging like mist over the animas. Weeks turned into a fragile truce on the San Juan slopes, the Eagle area beacon amid the escalating fray. Rio's recovery unfolded in quiet milestones, captured in the trail cam's unblinking gaze. His first sustained flap, wings cutting the air with tentative power, followed by awkward hops along the nest's rim that drew encouraging peeps from Sierra. She had become the undisputed anchor, her boldness a counterpoint to his caution, sharing the prime spots for sunning and scanning the horizon together as if the storm had forged them into a unit unbreakable. Ilara's hunts grew more frequent, her returns laden with trout from the animas or squirrels from the understory, ensuring the fledglings bulked up for the skies. The father eagle patrolled wider circuits now, his shadow sweeping the valley like a warning to intruders. But the distant growl of machinery tested his patience, sending him into agitated loops that left the nest exposed for precious minutes. In Durango, the fight against the logging proposal ignited like dry tinder under a summer sun. Maria Gonzalez coordinated from the ranger station, her desk buried under stacks of reports and email printouts, the scent of fresh ink mingling with the ever-present coffee brew. The petition had swelled to over 1,000 signatures, amplified by viral posts on the Audubon Society's social channels. Grainy footage of Rio's fall and rescue drawing views from Seattle to Miami. Save the Eagle's Nest rallies popped up at the farmers market on weekends, where vendors hawked honey jars labeled with Eagle stickers and locals in faded Broncos tees waved signs demanding habitat protection. Tom Riley became an unlikely spokesman, his birding expertise quoted in the Durango Herald, while Jake Harlan organized youth hikes for Miller Middle School kids, teaching them to spot raptor silhouettes against the peaks and the subtle signs of ecosystem strain. But the timber company dug in, their Denver lawyers filing counters with the Forest Service regional office, citing economic necessity in a post-wildfire economy where mills idled and families scraped by on seasonal tourism gigs. Harlan, the rep, not Jake, showed up at another community forum in the VFW hall, his voice booming over the clink of beer mugs. This ain't strip mining. It's selective cut. Jobs for Bayfield folks who've lost everything to flames. Murmurs rose, a mix of sympathy and skepticism. Maria sat front row, her notes meticulous, knowing the buffer zone's loss could fragment corridors vital for eagle migration. Dr. Ellis contributed remotely, emailing affidavits on stress impacts, how chronic noise elevated cortisol in raptors, stunting fledglings like Rio and Sierra, potentially dooming their first flights. One crisp afternoon, as aspen leaves turned gold along the cliffside trail, Maria led a monitoring team up the switchbacks, the air sharp with the bite of approaching fall. Her pack rattled with audio gear and a thermal drone, courtesy of a grant from the National Wildlife Federation. Tom trailed with his scope, Jake scouting ahead like a point man. The hike cleared her head, the crunch of gravel underfoot a rhythm that drowned out the station's phone rings. At the overlook, they settled into position, the eyrie framed by the lens like a living portrait. Rio was transforming, his down molting to juvenile feathers, brown-streaked and sleek, his wingspan nearly matching Sierra's as he balanced on the edge. Gusts ruffling his tail. She demonstrated a short soar to an adjacent snag, landing with a triumphant screech that pulled a mimic call from him, their voices harmonizing in the thin air. "Look at that bond," Tom whispered, zooming in. Storm made him tighter. Sierra's not just guarding, she's teaching. Maria nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She'd replayed the rescue in quiet moments. The feel of Rio's warmth against her chest, a talisman against burnout. But the east horizon marred the view. A fresh scar of cleared land, stumps like broken teeth where ponderosas once stood tall. The whine of saws carried faintly, a persistent undercurrent that made Ilara's head twitch mid-preen. The mother eagle fed the chicks a pigeon scrap, her beak deliberate, but her eyes darted eastward, body language screaming unease. Jake launched the drone with a soft whir, its camera sweeping the buffer zone. Thermals are already shifting, warmer pockets where the trees were. If they push further, updrafts could dump mid-flight. Data streamed to his tablet, graphs spiking like heart monitors in distress. As the device hovered, a worker below glanced up, waving it off with a hard hat like a matador's cape. No confrontation yet, but the line blurred daily. Maria radioed the station for updates. The regional office had scheduled a hearing in 2 weeks, buying time, but no guarantees. Push the tribal angle, she told her deputy. The Southern Ute had ancestral ties to these lands. Their environmental council already drafting a joint letter emphasizing cultural significance. Eagles as sky messengers in traditional stories. That evening, back at the station, exhaustion settled like fog over Maria's shoulders. She lingered after hours, the building empty save for the hum of fluorescent lights. Her phone lit up with a text from home, her husband, Carlos, reminding her of the kids' soccer game tomorrow, a normalcy that grounded her. But scrolling the Audubon app, she paused on user comments, heart emojis for Rio's progress, outrage at the logging clips Jake had uploaded, one from a birder in Texas. Fought this in Big Bend, lost the nest. Don't let it happen there. The word stung, a reminder of eagles lost to progress. Their rebound a hard-won miracle not to squander. Sleep evaded her that night, the ceiling fan in her bedroom whirring like distant chainsaws. Dreams wove the area with her childhood memories, climbing cottonwoods with her brother near Pagosa Springs, spotting their first eagle pair. Dawn brought resolve. She rose early, brewing coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and headed out before the sun crested La Plata. The team reconvened at the rehab center first, where Ellis ran a final check on archived footage. They're fledging soon. Rio's lags a bit, but Sierra's pulling him along. Noise is the wild card, could delay by days, weeks. By midday, they were at the cliff again, the wind carrying a chill that whispered of migration. Rio attempted his boldest move yet, a glide from the nest to a lower branch, wings splayed in a wobble that ended in a scramble but no fall. Sierra called approval, her form already practicing loops. The parents watched, Ilara's pride evident in her upright posture. But as a logging truck rumbled into view far below, loaded with logs that thumped like thunder, the father eagle erupted into flight, vanishing toward the noise in a streak of fury. Minutes later he returned, talons empty but feathers askew, as if he'd clashed with the unseen foe. Maria's heart raced. That's it. We escalate. Tom agreed, packing gear with steady hands. Hearing's our shot. Get the community out. Make it personal. Jake filmed the moment, the eaglet's innocence against the encroaching scar of visual plea. As they descended, the sun dipped, painting the valley in amber, the animas glittering like a promise. The eagles huddled closer, Sierra's wing draped protectively over Rio, their sibling vigil unbroken. Maria paused at the trailhead, breathing deep the pine-scented dusk, steeling for the battles ahead. The storm had been just the beginning. Now, humanity's hand loomed larger, testing the wild's endurance and the guardian's grit in equal measure. The hearing room in the Forest Service regional office in Grand Junction hummed with anticipation, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and polished wood paneling. Rows of folding chairs creaked under the weight of attendees, Durango locals in flannel shirts and hiking boots, tribal representatives from the Southern Ute in embroidered vests, and a smattering of suited lawyers from the timber company. Maria Gonzalez sat near the front, her ranger uniform crisp despite the long drive from the San Juans, her notebook filled with highlighted maps and witness statements. Beside her, Tom Riley fidgeted with his tie, unaccustomed to the formality, while Jake Harlan scrolled through drone footage on his phone, ready to project if called. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, carrying the first hints of snow from the La Salle Mountains across the Utah border. The panel, 3 stern-faced officials with name badges and stacks of documents, convened as the clock struck 10. The timber rep, Harlan, led off, his voice smooth as he outlined the proposal. Selective logging on 200 acres, replanting commitments, and economic ripple effects for struggling mill towns. Slides flickered on the screen, graphs showing job projections and minimal impact zones that conveniently skirted the Eagle Aries buffer. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Maria caught the eye of Elena from the Ute Council, who nodded subtly, her expression resolute. This wasn't just about trees, it was about sovereignty, about honoring treaties that promised unspoiled skies for the eagle, a sacred carrier in their traditions. Tom took the stand next, his hands steady on the podium despite the tremor in his voice. He walked them through years of data, nesting success rates, wind patterns, the storm's near tragedy with Rio. These birds aren't symbols on a quarter, they're families fighting to survive in a changing world, he said, cueing the nest cam footage. The room fell silent as Rio's fall played out in grainy detail. The gust's fury, the tiny form tumbling, Sierra's frantic calls from above. Gasps echoed, even the panel leaned forward. Jake followed. His youth belying his passion, layering in thermal scans showing how the cuts would disrupt updrafts essential for fledging. We've seen it before. Nests abandoned, chicks starving. Rio and Sierra are proof we can intervene, but prevention's better than rescue. Maria's testimony came last, her words measured, drawing from the gut. She described the climb, the rain-slick rock, the weight of Rio in her arms, his heart fluttering like a leaf in the wind. I felt responsible that night, like I'd failed them by not being there sooner. But this proposal, it's a choice we make now for every eaglet that comes after. She paused, meeting the panel's eyes. The San Juans aren't infinite. We've brought bald eagles back from the edge once. Don't push them over it again. Applause broke as she stepped down, raw and real, the room electric with shared outrage. The timber lawyers countered with experts of their own, foresters touting science-based methods, economists crunching numbers on lost revenue. But cracks showed, no full environmental impact study, overlooked tribal consultations, and a hurried timeline that smelled of corner cutting. Questions from the panel grew pointed, probing alternatives like ecotourism grants or fire-resilient thinning farther afield. Harlan shifted in his seat, his earlier confidence fraying. By the hearing's end, as the panel adjourned for deliberation, whispers of optimism circulated. The eagle's story had humanized the data, turning abstract habitat into a living, breathing fight. Back in Durango 2 days later, the verdict landed via email while Maria sipped chamomile tea at her kitchen table. The kids' laughter drifting from the backyard where they kicked a soccer ball under the crisp autumn sun. Proposal denied, the subject line read, followed by paragraphs citing insufficient mitigation, cultural impacts, and the eagle's protected status. Relief flooded her. Hot and sudden, tears blurring the screen, she forwarded it to the team, then grabbed her keys, heading straight for the cliff. The drive flew by, radio playing John Denver's Rocky Mountain High. Like an anthem, the La Plata peaks dusted white against the blue. At the trailhead, Tom and Jake waited, grins wide as the Animas Valley below. They hiked up in companionable silence, the path crunching with fallen leaves, the air alive with the chatter of Clark's nutcrackers. At the overlook, scopes out, the Eyrie came into view, transformed. Rio and Sierra were gone from the nest, their juvenile feathers fully in, brown heads bobbing in the distance as they perched on a pine snag halfway down the slope. Fledging had happened overnight, silent and swift. The siblings launching together under Alara's vigilant gaze. The parents circled above, majestic in the sunlight, their calls a triumphant chorus echoing off the rocks. Maria's breath caught, a swell of emotion rising like the thermals lifting the eagles higher. Sierra led the way, her flights surer, while Rio followed, his wing a touch hesitant but gaining strength with each beat. No trace of the storm's damage lingered in their forms. Instead, resilience shone, the sibling bond carrying them into independence. Below, the logging site sat idle, machinery tarp-covered. The scar halted before it deepened. The victory felt layered. For the birds, for the land, for the community that had rallied like a flock. Dr. Ellis confirmed it later that evening at the rehab center, reviewing the cams over takeout from Steamworks Brewing, IPAs and green chile fries, a Durango ritual. They're thriving. Rio's lag evened out. Sierra's push made the difference. Tom raised his glass, toasting the team, while Jake shared plans for an Eagle education program at the schools, turning the saga into lessons for the next generation. Maria drove home under a starlit sky, the mountain's dark guardians, her heart full. The fallen chick had risen, the nest guarded through storm and strife, a reminder that protection wasn't a solo flight but a shared wingspan. In the wild's grand tapestry, every rescue wove forward, fragile yet fierce. As the eagles vanished into the horizon, their silhouettes merging with the endless blue, the story of Rio and Sierra became legend in Durango's lore, a tale of fall and flight, loss, and unbreakable bonds. Leave a comment sharing what you thought about this story.